and welcome to the Comic Corner. My name is Damon Gray. I'm your host, and I have a bunch of brand new guests and co-hosts here on today's show. First, you may recognize her from our reality TV podcast, Emma Doris.
Hello. So great to be here. I am so excited.
We also have a returnee, our DC extraordinaire, AF Parker.
Hello, guys. So good to be back. So quickly, actually. I think the last one we did was about a month or so ago. So, yeah.
And today we welcome a dynamic duo at DC. We have Sarah Kuhn, the writer of titles such as Shadow of the Batgirl and Girl Taking Over, a Lois Lane Story, and Arielle Jovellanos is the artist of Girl Taking Over, Evil Thing, Black Star, and so many more. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So the first question we always ask whenever we have anyone new on the show is, what is your comic book origin story? How did you get into this world?
Do you mean as a reader, as a creator?
As a reader, as a fan, with the very beginning.
Okay. Let me see if I can remember that far back, because literally lifetime. Yeah, I mean, I grew up reading comics. I think my first loves were probably Betty and Veronica, and the X-Men was a big superhero gateway for me. And also, I was a huge fan as a very small child of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, which is one of the things that got us here today. So, yeah, I grew up in a very small, very white town. I was one of the only not white people in that town. And I think for me, things like fantasy and science fiction, superhero narratives, comic books were a big escape, because it sort of showed me that there was a bigger world out there. There was something else. There were many fantastical things to aspire to, like shooting fire out of your hands and, mind controlling people and things like that. So that was really how I got into it. I don't really remember a time when I didn't read comics. My brother and I used to haunt all of the grocery stores with the spinner racks, where you used to be able to buy comics for like 50 cents, 75 cents. Not the case anymore. But yes, those were definitely some of my formative texts.
So for me, in terms of non-superhero comics, I started pretty early with, Sunday comic strips, Peanuts. To this day, I have I love Garfield. I think Garfield is, yeah. He's an icon. He is. And then from there I moved on to manga, which my formative manga text is Ranma One Half by Rumiko Takahashi, who I always have a volume of it in next to me when I'm doing my comic layouts, because Rumiko Takahashi is honestly just very, very masterful in her layouts and her comic flow. I can read her all day. In terms of superhero stuff, I have a very unhinged story that I will not get into fully today. However, it actually, I was, maybe call me a fake fan, but I was a superhero movie gal first, before then moving on into picking up a superhero comic. The first,
it's okay.
Thank you.
There is no such thing as a fake fan. We say that here all the time.
Thank you. So the first tried and true superhero comic that I read was the Young Avengers, which is I love them. They're my absolute favorite superhero team up. I know that we're talking about a DC book, but Teen Titans Who? I'm here for the Young Avengers. And Kate Bishop, America Chavez, Eli, Cassie, all of them. Love them.
Damon is the number one.
I literally have a
fan.
Kate Bishop painting in my bedroom.
Yes, love them.
Kate
love
Bishop
her.
Stan, the ultimate
Yes.
Kate Bishop Stan.
I don't know. We might have to fight for that title.
Ooh, some
I am.
competition.
Yeah.
I love it.
I am
Arielle's-
willing to share a
Arielle's
title.
drawn a lot of very iconic art of Kate Bishop. I feel like for me, that is now the Kate Bishop. So, yeah, I got to give her the #1 fan title for sure.
I'm here for it.
Thank you.
I can't draw to save my life, so I have no fight in that race.
That's amazing.
Off
So,
off the back of all of that, you mentioned that you are a huge Kate Bishop stan as well. Was Kate Bishop like before Kate Bishop was introduced? Were there any superhero characters in Marvel or DC that you basically saw yourself in, or you loved that much that you could relate to? This is for both Arielle and Sarah. Arielle, maybe we can go with you and then back to Sarah again.
Oh yeah. So I think, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is that I really do love, maybe as like a New Yorker, I'm really into Steve Rogers and him representing Brooklyn. And then besides that too, I think I also was caught by the vintage historical setting of him, and just the idea of what he would be, I guess, surprised about in modern times. And I think that just really spoke to me as just a very compelling and interesting theme for him. And then besides that, also sort of like his sort of like, you know, he's like this very, very patriotic character where you would kind of expect him maybe to be like I'm following the rules good boy, but what he actually does follow more is like what's actually the right thing, rather than if someone says this is the right thing. He really follows his own like heart and moral compass in that way, and I think it's just really cool to see.
Yeah, and for me, I think there were a few. I mean, in the early days, I was a big Jean Grey Phoenix person. I think like her story to me is very misinterpreted, especially by men. I think that a lot of men think it's about, oh, this woman who's like overwhelmed with too much power, and I never thought that was what it was about. I thought it was more about kind of the duality that exists inside of us, and this woman who is literally trying to figure out how to save the people she loves, her family, everything else, even as there are these other forces working against her and within her. I think that is still a really powerful, really interesting story. And then, you know, more recently, I mean, I've been lucky enough to get to write the characters that I probably relate to the most. One is Cassandra Cain from Shadow of the Batgirl. I always thought she had a really interesting story with feeling sort of constantly like she wasn't worthy. I think a lot of us who choose to become creative people have that issue, have that sense of, you know, imposter syndrome, or just feeling like we can never measure up to what's come before us, or, you know, anything like that. So I always thought she was a really awesome, relatable character for me, even though I am not a teenage assassin. And then Lois Lane, I mean, was really one of my formative characters. You know, it started really in those Christopher Reeve Superman movies, and Margot Kidder to me was just such a force. She was so powerful. She was such, to me, the real protagonist of those movies. You know, we're really seeing Superman through her because she is the human that is sort of the conduit for the story. And so I always thought she was the main character of those movies, and I felt like that performance and the way it was written sort of made it so that you couldn't argue with that, even though plenty of people have, you know, tried to argue with me about it. And also, I just loved in the second one how it ends with her basically ordering Clark to go get her a hamburger and orange juice, and it's really early in the morning, and it doesn't matter. And that became certainly one of my formative life goals as a child.
I love that. So since we're all writers and readers here, are there any comics or novels or pretty much anything that you guys are currently reading right now?
Okay, so this is a question where we always forget that we've ever read anything. Any comic books. What's a book? I don't know.
I do the
But
same thing.
I think maybe we answered this question on a podcast we just did. So I'm going to try to remember what I said. One, I'm currently reading two books. One is The Neighbor Favor by Christina Forrest. It's an adult rom com by a YA romance author making her adult romance debut. And I always feel like romance and superhero comics are a very natural pairing for me. I probably love the X-Men so much because they were always like fighting about who's dating who, or like who did something to someone else, or like, their interpersonal conflicts are sort of just as important as saving the world to them every day. So, I always feel like romance and superheroes, great match. I feel like there's lots of crossover between the readers, probably more than we even know. And the other one, I cannot remember the exact order of the words. It's like thief, liar, lady, or liar, lady, thief. It's some combination of those three words. And it's by D.L. Soria, and it is a kind of twisted Cinderella retelling. It's adult fantasy. And basically, in this book, Cinderella and her step family are grifters who are trying to infiltrate high society. And I love a twist on a fairy tale. I mean, it feels like what we were doing with our book was also a twist on a classic story in a way. So that's something I'm always a sucker for.
Love that.
So for me, one of the books that I'm reading right now is Making Comics by Linda Berry, which is, I know, for example, Damon, you said that you can't draw to save your life, but I would really honestly argue you try reading this book and seeing how you feel after,
Okay.
because Linda Berry's whole philosophy is that anyone can draw, anyone has like a creative spirit. We just all like maybe lost it when we maybe got older and felt like more embarrassed about our art not looking how we wanted it to look. And so Linda Berry's book Making Comics is kind of about us like tapping back into that like creative childlike wonder and in making art. It's like fantastic. It's like just this book that's like equal parts like self-help and also like a bunch of drawing exercises that you could try. I would honestly highly recommend it, even if you think you're not an artist.
I love that.
Yes,
I'm gonna
Linda
have to check
Berry
that out
will
too.
unlock the creator in anyone. She is amazing. Also, one of my personal heroes, for sure.
I love it. Adding it to my list.
That's a challenge, Damon. I expect to see
It-
some artwork in the next month.
Yeah. Me
Honestly,
too.
honestly, I am definitely gonna do it. So I
Damon,
want to
you
talk.
can't let Linda
Yeah.
Berry down.
Yeah.
You can't let Linda Berry down. You
New
have to
new
do this now.
podcast idea. Just you showing
Yes.
all your exercises from this book.
Yes.
TJ, if you're listening.
I'll throw myself in the ring too because I also very much am not an artist. In high school, one of the things with my friends was I famously draw animals really badly, so I will take this as a challenge to see if maybe I also have that creative spirit that I just don't know about yet.
So Sarah, this one's for you. I want to talk about YA, and obviously it is geared towards a certain age demographic, but I really enjoy reading YA novels and YA stories because I just like the coming of age aspect to them. So how do you approach writing them, knowing that, yeah, it is for a certain age demographic, but like everyone can enjoy them?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think most of us are always going through some kind of coming of age. I feel like there's several cycles of that you go through in your lifetime. So I'm not sure why, we think that's a story that should be restricted only to teenagers. But certainly when you're a teenager, it is probably the most potent, the most immediate. You're feeling everything all the time, everywhere, everything everywhere all at once. Like you're
Yes.
feeling it in your heart, in your guts, your brain, everywhere. And I mean, for me, like I do think of the young readers first, and I think a lot of I think a lot about the young reader I used to be and what I was maybe missing, what stories I maybe needed, what stories would have opened up worlds of possibility to me much sooner. And I think then, if adults also appreciate it, that's a huge bonus. Certainly, I am also writing for the reader that I am now. But the teenage version of me always gets first dibs whenever it's a YA story or something for kids. And I think probably the story I've told that illustrates this the best is my YA prose debut was a rom-com called I Love You So Mochi. And it is about a Japanese American girl who goes to Japan for the first time on spring break, reconnects with her estranged grandparents who she's never really met, and ends up having a little romance with this boy she meets, who dresses up as a giant mochi mascot to work at his uncle's stand in one of the markets. So, already, like, this was not something that was pulled from my real life. I kind of wish it was. But while I was working on this book, I really had to get myself in the headspace of, like, what would it be like for a teenage girl going to Japan for the first time versus maybe me as an adult? And I ended up having wonderful conversations with this family I'm close to, the Okamotos, and they had just gone on a big trip. They have 3 children. The middle child, who's a girl, was kind of like the right age for the main character. And I just remember that, like, their dad, who's also like a Japanese American, many generations in, like myself, his experience was kind of, he gave this sort of speech about, like, it was so beautiful, like, I was finally proud of being Japanese. I reconnected with my heritage. I've never felt these feelings before. Oh my goodness, this was so epic. This was so moving. This trip was so pivotal. And then he kind of turned the kid to the kids and was like, "Hey, do you guys feel that way too?" And they were like, "No, not really." Like, what are you talking about? And, like, all of their stories were about things that could potentially embarrass you. So, like, there's this, like, monument that has this beautiful giant Buddha statue and this giant pillar with a hole cut in. It's called the Buddha's nostril. It's supposed to be the same size as the nostril on the statue. And tourists, like, crawl through it, like, you sort of shove your body through it, and then you get, like, good luck in this life and the next one, or something like that. And so they kept talking about that, and rather than saying, like, it's so beautiful, it's so, oh my goodness, this is so amazing, they were like, oh my God, imagine what would happen if you got stuck. Like, it would probably go viral on the internet, and then, like, you would be so embarrassed, and, like, your family would be so embarrassed, and they would have to come and, like, cut you out of the pillar. And oh my goodness, what if he was cool stuff? Like, so I think, like, for me, whenever I'm tackling any kind of YA narrative, I'm thinking of that audience first. I'm thinking of how they experience something, and I'm trying to have an awareness that it is not like, the way I would experience something now. The things they're thinking about are different, and I think it's important to put yourself in that headspace.
I love that. Kind of piggybacking off of that. So I also very much love reading YA books because I feel like the stuff we had when I was younger, there was a lot of great stuff, but I think now there's a wealth of, like, just wonderful coming of age books that honestly resonate with me now. So one of the things that resonated with me in this book was kind of Lois's journey on kind of, she had this one dream. She was very dead set on it. And then, things didn't really go according to plan. So that very much resonated with my life, even as an adult now. So what was kind of your inspiration for that storyline? Was it anything in your life, somebody you knew? I'd love to kind of dive into that.
I mean, yeah, I think it was, there's certainly a lot that was inspired by my life, by my friends' lives. I know Arielle had a lot of real life inspiration that she also brought into it, and, like, animating the characters and sort of bringing them to life. But, yeah, I mean, I would say that I was a fairly, I don't know, type A teenager. I had a very classic Japanese American tiger mom. She really wanted me to, like, go to a good college and get a good job and have health insurance and all of that. And so I think, like, when you have a goal like that, and my goal was also to kind of escape my really small hometown, which is also a goal of Lois's in this book, I think you have a tendency to set out a certain plan for yourself with many detailed steps. And it's sort of like once you do that, nothing can go wrong. You know, you can't have any disruptions to that. If you do, it's very upsetting. For Lois, it's very upsetting. And, you know, as part of this coming of age, I think something that we, you know, both Arielle and I wanted to incorporate was just like sometimes you start on a journey and things go wrong, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, the messiness of life is something we need to embrace to sort of experience life in all of its beauty. And then, kind of, the other side of that was Lois growing up in this really small, really white town. I think has sort of gotten this idea that if she's just excellent enough, if she's just amazing enough, if she just does the thing that she's good at and excels at this, somehow that will allow her to like transcend racism. Like people won't be mean to her. People won't see the face that doesn't fit first. And, you know, obviously that is incredibly false. As one of the characters says to her at one point, you cannot transcend racism. Like, that is not the point of all of this. So I think that was also something that I wanted to incorporate as part of her journey because, you know, I think that kids every day are sort of renegotiating their identities. I mean, I think that adults are as well. And sometimes we just need to see that, like, you know, there isn't a map for it. There isn't a set of rules for it. There's not like a series of steps you can follow and then ultimately triumph. You kind of have to like figure some of it out as you go along. And that's certainly a lesson that probably would have been great if I could have learned that as a teenager.
I completely agree.
Did you have any thoughts on that, Arielle?
I don't know, man. You just nailed it.
Arielle said no notes.
I feel like every time that we've had an interview and I go after Sarah, I'm just like, yeah, what she said.
But I mean, same. Like, I feel like we are a good dynamic duo because, you know, we do a good job of like answering the question and then hopefully not duplicating our responses.
I think so.
Yeah. So I'm going to flip this one straight to Arielle because she's the artist, and I just want to know, in terms of this Lois Lane novel, what went into you finding the overall mood for the art style that you ended up with?
Oh, so that is a great question, and I think first, I always want to like shout out Sarah and the way she writes scripts because there's just like a way that she writes enough description to me that I can feel what she's going for, and there's still enough room for me to play around with it. In this case, sort of how she had pitched it in like her notes was like, okay, it's like Lisa Frank. It's bright and energetic.
Oh, yes.
Um, it's animated, and I feel like, you know, a lot of that is within my wheelhouse anyway, so it just felt like a natural fit. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't like a huge stretch to kind of like come up with the look for this, just because in my own work, what I do love drawing is really cute young characters in cute outfits, and I love getting to use the setting of a place in a room or in outdoors or exteriors, anything like that, to also communicate communicate like elements of the story. So I think in that way, Sarah and I were just like a perfect like stylistic fit. And there's a description in that I remember, and it stuck with me, is that throughout this book, Lois has a like a journal where she's writing her different notes and kind of coming up with different pitches for her stories, things like that. And I think what was interesting for me was how do you draw two styles, essentially, where one style is, this is like the real world of the book, and then the other style is this is Lois's fantasies. This is like kind of the cartoon version of how Lois draws herself and her friends, etc. So I think in that way that was really really fun. The description that Sarah had given was, can I curse? If not, I could self-bleed. But
Absolutely.
Go for it.
this is your bullet journal on fucking steroids. And I was like, okay, got it.
Yeah, which is also amazing because I think Arielle, you're the one who like told me what a bullet journal is. Like at that convention we did together, you had like I think you had some bullet journals you had made, and like at the time that was becoming a big thing. So like a lot of artists at this convention had like their different versions of bullet journals. But I think you were the one who showed me how to bullet journal in the first place. So this was very full circle.
Coincidentally, there were one of the. I think also the reason that Sarah and I paired so well on this project is that we had known each other for a few years at this point, but we had never been able to work on like a long-term project. We worked on like one 4-page comic a few years ago, which was really fun, and I could tell from then, oh, like I think that if we worked on something longer, we'd really have like a strong understanding of what each other were going for. In any case, though, yes, one of the earliest interactions that we had was that we both guested at this same convention, and our tables were next to each other, and during some downtime, I was like, okay, let me explain to you bullet journaling. And then, so when it came up in this book, I was like, wow, full circle, we did it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
real full circle right there.
So there are many different types of, I guess, formatting in comics, right? Like you have your traditional single issues, and then when you put them all together, it's like, all right, you have a trade, and then you put a lot of those together, it's like you have a compendium and an omnibus. Now this is a traditional graphic novel. What are like some of like the benefits and maybe some things you don't expect that would be a hindrance in a road when tackling something like this, as opposed to like your traditional single issue that would be like a monthly publish?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that like with the DC Young Readers graphic novels, it's always an interesting process because obviously, you know, we have to sort of come up with and pitch the full story several times. There's like many layers of approvals whenever you're doing anything licensed. So like sometimes like directives change, sometimes what's being asked for changes. Like you just don't know. But by the time you get to actually making the actual comic, a lot of times you've been through the story so many times, but really only in this sort of like zoomed out outline kind of way. And because this is a graphic novel that's, you know, 180 pages of script, you have to come up with like all of the story first. Like you can't sort of just like see, oh, this feels like they're like, let me change this or whatever. But then once you get into actually writing the script, making the book, seeing the art come back, then there is some room for, you know, changes or improvisation. So with these graphic novels, we actually do them in, I believe, 4 different parts. It's like an Act 1, 2 parts of Act 2, and then Act 3, which is always the shortest. But sometimes has the most challenging art in that. We can talk about that too. You know, I think what's been really wonderful about the process with these DC Young Readers graphic novels, and both of them that I'd done, both Shadow of the Batgirl, which was with the amazing Nicole Gu, and then Lois Lane with Arielle, was just that like I felt like we got in both instances we got in sort of this groove of like almost sharing a brain, like kind of going back and forth with a lot of things, like kind of like writing and drawing is sometimes a reaction to each other. So you know, with Arielle, there were just certain things that she did that, you know, I was already a huge fan. Like she said, we had kind of like this ongoing like artist crush on each other. We wanted to work together. We knew it would happen someday, and this project ended up being perfect. But you know, with this particular story, I would notice things like when we started getting some of the first Act One pages back. Oh, like the way she does montage, for instance, is really amazing. The way she does collage is really amazing. The way she sort of does, like she was talking about, this different style for the journal pages is really amazing. And so that's something that then you can start writing too. You know, where you're like, oh well, how about another montage here? How about another collage page here to really like bring that out? And then also, of course, with like the way Arielle draws like expressions and movement and fashion, of course, like Sarah Miller, our editor, and I, we just like wanted every single outfit that she came up with all the time. Um, but there were like little things. Like there's one scene where one of the characters like is across the room in the office and kind of says something, and Lois Lane is like, "Wait, what?" And she like slides her like rolling chair over like it's almost this little action like zoom. And that was something where I think I was like, oh my god, like Ariel will make this so amazing, like just this one panel of movement will be so incredible. And so I think like that's a nice thing about working on such a long project like a graphic novel with someone, and then being able to work on it in kind of these different segments so you can really start to get into a groove together and kind of play off of each other in that way.
Yeah, I think the other benefit to that too was kind of like, so we have like a shared folder where it's me, Sarah Miller, our editor, and Olivia Pacini, our colorist, who's an amazing colorist. You might know her work also from doing some background coloring on Tuca and Birdie, which is fantastic. You can definitely see kind of like that sensibility in the book too. But I think what was always enjoyable for me over time, over like the process of this, is like I would drop my inks in, and I would get to see Olivia drop her colors in and just be like, wow. And then like also later down the line, when our letterer Melanie Ujimori got involved too, I would start to like kind of secretly peek into these folders that like they're not like my folders that I'm supposed to be looking at it, but I still like have access to it. So I'd be like, ooh, how's the book coming together? So I think in that way it was, whereas like versus in floppy comics where the production timeline is just so short, I rarely get to kind of like see what it all looks like in progress. I just kind of see what it looks like at the very, very end. With this, kind of sneaking through our like group folders, I was just like seeing the gradual magic of how this book comes together and getting these constant like previews and peeks and just getting like excited and re-inspired all over again.
That's awesome.
So the world is so colorful. It's like one of the more unique books I've seen. Honestly, it's really really great. And one of the more unique pages in the book is when like Lois and Mickey are scrolling through their social media and they're just like looking at like the reaction to their story. It's just so chaotic, and it really, I don't know, like I think like Emma's definitely had a couple. I've had like one where like a post goes viral and you're just like constantly scrolling. You're like, you both captured that so well. What is the like? How do you lay that out on a page? Because do you start with the characters looking at it? Do you start with the words themselves, or you just kind of, it becomes like you said, a collage, and it just kind of like one over the other over the other?
That is a great question. So I guess I can, from like the visual point of view, if I remember correctly, sometimes with Sarah's collages, she would sometimes like kind of pitch an idea for the formatting, but generally just be like, okay, these like visual events or like beats need to be hit, just do it. And then I think in some ways that's like, that can be like a little like, oh no, like what do, but then like but then like when I really like kind of sit down to do it, kind of the freedom of trying to capture this feeling, kind of like that is like the momentum that pushes me through laying it out. So from like on a more technical like point of view, when I mentioned someone like Rumiko Takahashi and how she does comic flow, something that I'm always like very conscious is just how the order in which the information is going to be read on the page, and then how to make that both clear and visually interesting. So for me, how it actually starts off is like um, scribbles in the margin of the script. Like literally just me doing the most illegible scribbles just for me to kind of map out and figure out, okay, what piece of information is going where, and how am I going to like execute that visually. And when I say like scribbles, they are really scribbles. I wouldn't send that to I probably wouldn't send that to like an editor. Like I would probably before sending to an editor, I would do like a second or third pass. But for me, like first that first version that is like extremely like just me trying to plan things out is very, very important. And I think that is kind of like how I make comic pages in general, just because you have to keep track of so many things going on, but the way to kind of keep it moving, keep it consistent, and keep it like narratively functioning is to start off with like just vomiting your first idea of it via scribbling, and then like fixing it later. I think it almost in that way, that's sort of also why I believe even if you think you can't draw, comics just essentially starts from the most like stick figure-y scribbles possible, and then you just keep drawing on top of that over and over again until it becomes something more clear and legible. So again, literally, it's not to like discredit my own work, but I think anyone, if you take the time to like really figure it out, think about how to visually communicate a thing, it's anyone can do it, and it's like very fun once you finally crack the code. To me, it felt like a puzzle, to be honest.
Yeah.
If there's one thing I've learned today, it's
Yeah.
that there's hope for me yet.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I mean, also, like, I think, like, something that is and should be encouraged for writers, especially writers who can't draw like me, is when you are scripting, it's helpful if maybe you do some scribbles. You know, you try to figure out, like, how would this look? How would the flow go on the page? Am I putting way too much on one page, you know, that can possibly fit? And I do remember with that particular spread, that was something that I think we revised several times, both in script, in layouts, and art, and then even the final with like the lettering and stuff. We had to do a little bit of revision because we did kind of want that feeling. Like Rumiko Takahashi is a perfect example of like we wanted that movement. We wanted that feeling of like something is happening, even though what you're looking at is sort of these like little spurts of information, these headlines about, you know, the stories they've broken in the zine, the sort of reaction they're getting from readers, the way that they are sort of like contending with that as the creator of this thing that's going viral. And so, you know, I remember things like, I think the way that I wrote most of the montages and the double page spreads, like I was really trying to leave room for Arielle to like take ownership of that and be as creative as she wanted to be. So instead of breaking it into panels, we would do things like, this is area one. This maybe has these two people doing this, and maybe some text messages doing this. This is area two. This has this and that. Just so it was sort of clear, like what was happening in what order, sort of. And then we would come up with what were hopefully creative solutions, whether that was just like, you know, Arielle like doing the scribbles and figuring out what goes fit where and what information is important, or sometimes like Sarah, our editor, who's just an amazing, like, intuitive, like, understands every part of the comics making process, would suggest things like, hey, what if instead of having another full drawing of these two characters, we have a phone that has like their text on the screen, and we can still have their little floating heads, so it's still cute and like we know that it's them talking, but this is perhaps a more efficient way of getting that information out. And so I felt like, that spread was definitely something that I think all of us, including then Olivia and Melanie, like worked on really hard to make sure it was landing correctly.
Cool. So I have a bit of a fun question. This is directed at both Arielle and Sarah. A couple of weeks ago, I did a write-up for James Gunn's new DCU of who the potential Superman fan cast would be, and one of my fan casts was Justin Min from the Umbrella Academy, and opposite him, I would fan cast Anna Akana as Lois Lane. So my question for both of you are, who would your potential fan cast be for Lois Lane? And for the Lois Lane that you guys wrote and drew in this novel, were there any actresses that you had in mind while you were doing the work?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, Ariel, was there anyone, because since you did the character design, was there anyone visual that you were inspired by, or?
Okay, I think you had given me.
Or did I put
Yes, you
someone in
did.
there?
So
Maybe I did.
I forget who it was, but yeah, you did. Actually, which is while I look it up, I will say that that is a very common, or at least for me as the artist, um, it is always helpful for me to kind of ask a writer like, okay, who would play her? Who would play them? Because then that gives me that kind of, it just, not because I'm going to exactly copy that person, but because it just gives me like an understanding of like the vibe or type of person that you think this is. Now, while I load this thing, I will say that on the
Well, I
other
think.
end of it,
Sorry, go ahead.
um, I know for sure that Miki's friend was basically like was very very similar to Naomi Watanabe in terms of Lois. Okay, I have it. I think Raina Hardesty and Maggie Q were the two ones listed. Yeah,
Oh,
Maggie
Raina
Q.
Hardesty, and who is the other one? Oh yeah, Maggie Q. So yeah, like I think there were a few actresses I sort of like, and then we probably both took some inspiration from. But yeah, both of those are wonderful. Anna Akana, I love. She's amazing. She put my very first novel in one of her videos, so I love her forever. And she kind of has that like sassy Lois Lane spirit. I also love Midori Francis, who I think is currently on Grey's Anatomy and has been in a bunch of stuff. I think she's amazing. She kind of has that same vibe, that same style, that just really, I don't know, like perseverance and sense of fight, I guess. But yeah, I think there are a lot of young, particularly Asian American actresses who would be fantastic Lois Lanes. I feel like that, there's just like a world of possibilities out there for who that could be.
So I enjoyed this book, by the way. So like I enjoyed this book so much that we got the Cassandra Cain book is literally at my door right now. Or I heard the doorman knock. It arrived, so I'm very excited to read that. But as you mentioned, this version of Lois Lane is an Asian American, and that is really really cool because her character itself, she never changes. She's still incredibly ambitious. So I want to know, like, where did that idea of just changing that portion of her background come from, and how do you still make sure that she still feels like Lois Lane? Because she did. You absolutely nailed that.
Thank you. I think, that's a huge compliment to both of us. But yeah, I mean, I guess it started when, after I finished the script for Batgirl and we were kind of finishing up the book, I loved working with Sarah, my editor. She's incredible. She's just like the platonic ideal of like the editor that you want. She's so creative. She's so intuitive. Like she's such a wonderful partner, and this book is definitely just as much hers as it is ours. And so, I kind of sat down with her and was like, hey, I would love to work with you again. I would love to like write another cool character in the DC YA universe. Is there anything you're looking for? Is there anything you think I would be particularly good at? Like, let me know. And so she was like, yeah. And I think she brought up a few things, but she's like, I am looking for maybe a YA Lois Lane. I would love maybe a story that's kind of like the TV show The Bold Type or the Carrie Diaries, where it's like, girl in the city, like discovering her passion for the truth and journalism and whatever else. And like, a very contemporary story maybe doesn't have as many supernatural aspects, maybe doesn't even have superheroes. And she was like, I think that's something that would be very much in your wheelhouse, would be a great match for you, like considering your other work. And so I was like, well, Lois Lane is one of my all-time favorite characters. I would probably die if I got the chance to write her. But, I am pretty dedicated to writing Asian American protagonists. That's something I've been able to do my entire career. I'm very proud of that. That's something I would like to keep doing. So do you think that DC would be open to me writing an Asian American teenage Lois Lane? And she thought about it for a minute and she was like, I think the only editorial directive we have for Lois right now is that she has black hair. And so I was like, okay, well, that sounds like a pretty good fit. And then since then, I've really found that like there are a lot of Asian Americans, especially women who are around my age, who just kind of always thought that, like, because she was a character with black hair who was drawn in different ways depending on who the artist was. I think she was a character that you could kind of project that onto. You could kind of see yourself in her if you wanted to. And I think because she is so ambitious, because she is a fighter, because she is always kind of trying to write herself a better story, she was certainly someone I saw myself in. She was probably one of the reasons I pursued journalism in the first place. And so to be able to sort of give her, some of my stories, some of the things that shaped me, and have that still feel, within the Lois Lane canon, felt very special, felt very cool. And I do think that it's important to be able to reimagine some of these really epic legacy characters in a more inclusive and modern way. Whenever something like this happens, I get the, hey, why are you messing with this character? Why don't you create your own Asian American heroes? And I was like, guess what? I do that literally every day of my life. Please consult my Wikipedia page. But I also think it's important for especially young people to be able to see themselves in these heroes that have been around for decades. I think that is something that is very important. Like everybody knows who Lois Lane is. Everybody knows who Superman is. So isn't it important to show kids that they can also be that important, that they can see themselves in this very legendary legacy character? And also because these are legendary legacy characters, they have been interpreted many different ways over the years. I remember I was talking to an editor of mine who is a little bit older than me, has been collecting Lois Lane comics like since the beginning. And she was like, oh, well, I stopped collecting them when they gave Lois a more modern hairdo. Like it didn't look as much like Lois Lane. And so there have been so many different interpretations of these characters. I think like iconic characters that are really, have a lot of history lend themselves really well to that. We're always looking for the next interpretation, for the next thing that sort of brings them into the modern world. So, I felt like Lois Lane, especially since her sort of persona and her drive and her fight are things that to me feel very modern, it just seems natural.
My last question for both of you, and I don't know how much you can say about anything, which is totally fine. If there's any upcoming projects that you would like to do, and if you can't tease any upcoming projects, any characters you haven't written or drawn that you just like, that has to be the next one?
Okay. So we have been getting this question a lot. We can't like, yeah. I think there's
Naturally.
not like exactly plans for a sequel, but I think Sarah and I love kind of playfully imagining what that might be and if it will involve me getting to draw a himbo Superman. But yeah, but
I want that really bad right
as
now.
for yeah, I can I can
I am
only
so
say for
sold.
myself that is something that I would find
Ew.
highly enjoyable. To draw like cute like farm boy Clark Kent trailing after Lois in an office, holding
Yes.
her
Oh my
her
goodness.
unicorn frappuccino and her purse.
Do it.
That
it.
would be
Yeah, now I
my
hate this.
personal like. If we could, I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say no.
Yes, I mean, we've definitely had like these conversations behind the scenes and also in other interviews we've done. And it's kind of funny because, we've gotten this question a lot about sort of having a Lois Lane story that does not have Superman, that does not have Clark Kent, that does not have sort of the other person who is usually present in Lois's stories. And to be honest, like, I have occasionally bristled at that question because I'm like, Lois Lane is awesome. Like, she doesn't need anyone else. Like, she is the protagonist. She can be the main character. Like, that we don't need Superman. Like, Cassandra Cain was like the Shadow of the Batgirl book was also a universe without Batman. Like, I was like, Batman does not exist in this universe because if he did, he's doing a really bad job protecting Gotham City. Like, I don't think we should have Batman around because it's actually like bad for Batman because it's like showing him being a very bad hero that, like no one's taking care of Gotham City and Cassandra Cain has to like swoop in and take up the mantle because there's no other heroes. So with this one, I was like, we don't need Superman. Like, Lois Lane should be able to exist by herself as the main character of a story. But ever since Arielle started talking about drawing himbo Superman, that's the thing that has like swayed me to like, all right, if we are lucky enough to get a sequel like that, I feel is a must, is to have like himbo Clark Kent, himbo Superman, just kind of following this version of Lois Lane around because how amazing would that be? And how awesome would it be that then he's sort of the sidekick in those stories? Because I feel like that would be what would have to happen. And also, I feel like this version of Lois Lane would not really let him.
You know how
be
like Lois
anything
is
but,
shoving
like,
the
sidekick.
she's even like shoving the title off the cover. She would definitely shove Clark off the cover
Yeah.
too.
100%.
Yeah.
Clark would have to get past Noah first, though.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. We've had some conversations about that too, just because, like, there is a slight, perhaps, physical similarity between Noah and Clark, which I don't think
To
was
clarify,
like
Noah
initially
is
intentional, but
the
is
love
kind
interest
of funny.
in this book. Yes, yes,
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. And so, like, it's funny because then, of course, like, we all got so invested in every character in this book that Sarah, our editor, has even said things like, oh, I'm reading this page and it's making me so sad because I know that Lois and Noah have to break up in the future because she has to get together with Clark. Like, that's how the canon goes, but it's making me so sad because, we all fell in love with Noah. So, we'll see what happens in the future. Lois Lane, I feel like probably her teenage self in college has a very tempestuous love life. So that could also be something that's fun for us to explore.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on. This was an absolute delight. I loved this book. I know Emma did too. We were talking about it before us coming on and how much of just a delight it was. Where can we find more of you, Sarah? And then we will go to Arielle.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm online as much as every writer, which means too much. I am still on Twitter, as unusable as it's become. It's just my name, Sarah Kuhn. On Instagram, I'm Sarah Kuhn Books because someone took Sarah Kuhn and isn't doing anything with it. But you can find me there as Sarah Kuhn Books. And then I do have a website that, to be honest, I almost never update. But it is heroincomplex.com. That's heroin, like super heroin, not the drug, because heroin was the name of my debut novel, which is about Asian American superheroines living their messy lives in San Francisco. So those are the kind of places you can find me and keep up on whatever I'm doing next, and hopefully get the first news that Arielle and I are doing some kind of himbo Superman Lois situation.
I will be monitoring.
Sarah, I feel like the more we say it, the more it will like manifest.
I know, we're
manifesting
speaking
it
it into the universe. We're putting it into the universe.
Into existence.
Or more like
Yes.
we're just rallying enough people to our cause that they will like break down the doors of DC. Yeah.
Yeah.
We will do whatever we have to do with our any sort of capacity that we have. So I'm in.
Front page tomorrow, agentsofFandom.com.
Yes.
Telling you.
Yes.
We
We'll
love
make
it.
that our
Thank you.
most viral
One
post.
project we wanted, not three. One project we want to see.
So you can find me also on the Melon Husk website and the and Instagram, mostly on Instagram. It's the same handle, which is at JOVIELLETY. Or you can also find me on my website, which is just my name, Arielle-Jovellanos.com, and where you can see all my other fun illustrations, including of like Kate Bishop and other fun superheroes, things like that, and my other graphic novels. So yeah, definitely say hi.
Emma and AF, where can people find you?
Oh, so this question is always funny because my username on Twitter is very hard to say out loud. So I am still on Twitter at _EMMINEM, kind of like Eminem the rapper. And Instagram, I have kind of like a bookstagram sort of profile. I'm at books_and lattes. So nothing where it's my actual name to make things easier. I'm going to have to change that at some point.
Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter at AFParker642. I normally just tweet about comics, movies, and soccer. Damon,
You can say football. It's okay.
I have to cater to
I
my
am a
audience over here.
Yeah,
I'm
you
going
know
to
I'm
say
a football
football.
fan too. It's fine.
Before you guys go, can I just say that I absolutely loved Lois's mom. She
Oh,
was
thank
Yes.
amazing.
Thank
Amazing.
you. Thank you. She's I think one of our favorites that was like a character that we got to create, and my mom was very important in like my coming of age, my growing up, my sort of like learning how to be proud of being Asian, learning like the history behind our family and all of that. So I think like we both really wanted to give her like this older mentor character who is also a bit harsh sometimes and a bit maybe overzealous with what she thinks are pep talks, but she obviously loves her daughter very much.
I also very much enjoyed the breathing technique. It's very.
Yes, I love
Yeah.
that a lot.
You can find me on Twitter so long as I'm still on it at Damon Tweet. You can find me on TikTok so long as you can still access it at Damon Talks Comics. Who knows what other social media app will pop up in the next 24 hours? I'll be there too. This has been another episode of The Comic Corner. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.